Introduction, the size of your thinking. Everything you have ever built began as a thought, not a plan, not a strategy, not a 5-year roadmap with quarterly milestones. A thought, a flicker of something possible that arrived before any of the structure around it existed. And the size of what you build, whether it becomes large or small, whether it reaches people or stays quietly contained, whether it changes things or leaves them exactly as they were, that size was largely determined before you ever took the first step. It was determined by how big you allowed yourself to think. This is both the most exciting and the most uncomfortable truth about human potential. Exciting because it means expansion is always available. You do not need new resources or new circumstances to begin thinking at a larger scale. You only need to be willing to sit with a bigger question than you have allowed yourself before. Uncomfortable because it means that the limits of what you have built so far are not primarily external. They are internal. They live in the size of the vision you are willing to hold. This book is about expanding that vision, not through optimism for its own sake, or through the kind of motivational inflation that encourages you to dream without regard for reality, but through a serious examination of the forces that keep thinking small and a practical path toward the kind of thinking that produces genuinely different results. Now, you are capable of more than you are currently attempting. This is not flattery. It is, statistically, almost certainly true. Because the research on human potential is consistent. Almost universally, people constrain themselves far more than their circumstances constrain them. The ceiling is not above you. It is inside you. The work of this book is to raise it. Chapter 1. The size of your thinking. Your thinking has a size. Most people have never examined it. By the size of your thinking, I mean something specific. The scale of possibility you are willing to seriously entertain. Not as a fantasy. Most people can imagine winning the lottery or writing a best-selling novel in the abstract, but as a genuine, actionable intention. Something you are actually willing to plan for, work toward, and organize your decisions around. The size of thinking that most people operate at is shaped by a handful of factors they have almost never deliberately examined. The environment they grew up in, the ambitions of the people around them, the examples they were exposed to of what someone like them could achieve, the beliefs they formed early about what is realistic, what is arrogant, what is appropriate. These inputs were never consciously chosen. They arrived, were absorbed, and became the invisible ceiling that sits above your planning. You may never bump into it because you rarely even look up. But it is there, shaping every decision about how much to attempt, how far to aim, how much to invest. The first step in thinking bigger is simply to look up, to ask with genuine curiosity and without immediate judgment, what would I attempt if I believed it was actually possible? Not what would I dream about idly. What would I actually pursue, plan for, and organize my energy around if the ceiling were 10 feet higher than I currently believe it to be? The answer to that question is your bigger thinking, and it is closer than you think because the distance between your current thinking and your bigger thinking is not measured in years of preparation or decades of skill building. It is measured in willingness, the willingness to hold a larger intention and treat it as real. That willingness is the first and hardest step, and it is entirely within your control today. Chapter 2. Fear dressed as realism. The most effective way the mind keeps thinking small is not fear. Fear is visible. Fear can be named and examined and worked with. The most effective way the mind keeps thinking small is realism, or rather, the thing that calls itself realism while doing the work of fear. When you think about a bigger goal and immediately hear a voice that says, "This is impractical, this is not how things work. Be realistic," that voice is not wisdom. It is a defense mechanism wearing wisdom's clothes. It is your nervous system, which is not interested in your growth, protecting you from the exposure of failure. And it has chosen the most persuasive possible disguise, the reasonable person. The reasonable person sounds credible. The reasonable person cites statistics and historical precedents and the sensible behavior of cautious people. The reasonable person does not seem afraid. The reasonable person seems sensible. And this is exactly what makes the voice so effective at keeping your thinking contained. Here is a test for distinguishing genuine realism from fear dressed as realism. Genuine realism says, here are the specific obstacles, and here is what addressing them would require. It is constructive. It points toward the preparation and planning that ambitious goals require. Fear dressed as realism says, this probably will not work, and here is why other people have failed. It is discouraging. It points away from the goal without offering a path forward. One is a tool for building. The other is a tool for stopping. When you notice the voice of realism, do not dismiss it, but interrogate it. Ask whether it is pointing toward preparation or toward retreat. Ask whether it is describing specific obstacles that can be addressed or generating a general atmosphere of doubt. Ask honestly whether the realist in your head has skin in the game, whether they would be better off if you played small. The answer is usually yes. The part of you that calls itself realistic is often the part of you that is most afraid. Knowing this does not silence it, but it does give you a way to hear it without being governed by it. Chapter 3. The people around you. Your thinking does not happen in isolation. It happens in a social environment, and that environment has a profound, largely invisible effect on what you allow yourself to consider possible. The people closest to you carry a model of you, a version of who you are, what you are capable of, what kind of person you are. And over time, through 1,000 small interactions, they communicate that model back to you. Through their reactions to your ideas, through the questions they ask and the questions they do not ask, through their enthusiasm and their hesitation, through what they celebrate and what they quietly discourage. Most of the time, their model of you is built from who you have been, not who you are becoming. It is based on evidence from your past, not on the vision you are building toward. And when your vision begins to expand beyond the version of you they know, the social pressure to stay legible, to remain the person they already understand, can be significant. This is not malice. The people who love you want to protect you from disappointment. They have seen you try things before, and some of those things were harder than expected. Their hesitation is often care, not sabotage. But care directed at the version of you they already know can be one of the most effective brakes on the version of you that is still becoming. The practical implication is important. You need to be intentional about who you share your bigger thinking with and when. Not secretive. Secrecy breeds stagnation, but strategic. The early stages of a bigger vision are fragile. They need to be shared with people who can hold them with you before they need to be defended to people who will challenge them. Find the people who have gone where you are trying to go, or who are going there alongside you. Their presence expands what feels possible. Their questions sharpen rather than deflate your thinking. And their model of you is built not on who you have been, but on who you are capable of becoming. That is the environment where bigger thinking survives long enough to become something real. Chapter 4. Building capacity for more. Thinking bigger is necessary, but it is not sufficient. At some point, the vision has to meet the infrastructure, the actual capacity to execute at the level the vision requires. This is where many ambitious people get stuck. They expand their thinking but not their capacity. They hold a bigger goal without building the systems, skills, relationships, and resources that the goal actually requires. And the gap between the vision and the infrastructure produces a kind of paralysis. Too big to execute at the current level, but not yet resourced enough to execute at the level the vision requires. The path through this gap is deliberate capacity building, not preparation for its own sake. The trap of perpetual readiness, always getting ready without ever beginning, but targeted development of the specific capabilities that the bigger goal actually requires. The first step is an honest inventory. What does the vision require that you do not currently have? Not everything. Focus on the 2 or 3 most significant gaps. The gaps that, if closed, would open the path forward more than anything else. These are your primary investments. The second step is a commitment to the long game of development. Capacity building is slow. Skills take longer to develop than plans take to make. Relationships take longer to build than strategies take to design. And the impatience of ambition, the desire to execute now at the level the vision requires, can push you to attempt too much too soon before the foundation is ready to support the weight. The third step is to begin executing at whatever level you currently can, while simultaneously building the capacity for more. These are not sequential activities. You do not wait until you are ready before you start. You start at the current level and build toward the next one at the same time. The execution itself is part of the capacity building. You learn by doing in ways you cannot learn any other way. Bigger thinking requires bigger capacity. Build it deliberately, specifically, and without waiting for it to be complete before you begin. Chapter 5. Taking the first step toward big. One of the most common ways ambitious thinking fails to produce anything is the waiting problem. The waiting problem looks like this. The bigger vision is clear, the desire is genuine, but action keeps being deferred to a future point when conditions will be more favorable. When there is more time, more money, more certainty, more readiness. The vision stays real and vivid in the mind while the calendar continues to turn, and the first step keeps being something that will happen next month or next year or when things settle down. The first step toward big thinking rarely feels like the beginning of something big. It feels like a small, somewhat uncertain action in the general direction of something you cannot yet clearly see. It does not feel commensurate with the scale of the vision. It feels inadequate. And this inadequacy, the gap between the size of the vision and the smallness of the available first step, is one of the primary reasons the first step gets indefinitely deferred. But the first step does not need to be commensurate with the vision. It needs to be real. It needs to be an actual action taken today in the direction of the bigger thing. Not a plan to take an action, not a conversation about the action itself. The power of the first step is not in its size. It is in what it does to your psychology. Taking a real step toward a bigger vision changes your relationship to the vision. It moves from the category of dream, things that are thought about but not acted on, into the category of project, things that are actively being built. This transition changes how you think about it, how you talk about it, how seriously you hold yourself accountable to it. It also creates the first piece of real information. The plan is abstract. The first step produces feedback about what is easier or harder than expected, about what the next step actually is, about what the real obstacles are rather than the imagined ones. What is one real action you could take today, no matter how small, in the direction of the bigger vision? Take it. The rest will become clearer from that position than it ever will from here. Chapter 6. Handling the gap between vision and reality. Almost everyone who pursues a bigger goal goes through a painful period when the gap between the vision and the current reality is at its most visible and most demoralizing. The vision is clear. The intention is genuine. The first steps have been taken. And yet, the results are nowhere near the vision. The reality looks small compared to the picture in the mind. And the gap between them feels like evidence that the vision was wrong, that the goal was too big, that perhaps the realistic voice was right after all. This gap is not a sign that the vision is wrong. It is a structural feature of every ambitious endeavor at the early stage. The vision always precedes the reality. This is not a failure of the vision. It is how building works. The gap has a name in the creative world. It is sometimes called the taste gap. You have developed enough taste, enough vision, enough sense of what you are trying to build to recognize clearly that what you have produced so far is not yet at the level of what you imagined. And the distance between those two things can feel like inadequacy when it is actually just the gap between beginning and mastery. The people who close the gap are not the ones who were born with more talent or more resources. They are the ones who stayed in the gap long enough, producing enough work at the current level that the gap eventually closed. The gap closes through accumulated volume and commitment, not through a single breakthrough moment. Two things help enormously when you are in the gap. The first is to keep the vision and the current reality in separate mental compartments. Do not measure today's output against the final vision. Measure it against yesterday's output. Progress against your own baseline is real, even when the gap between you and the vision is still large. The second is to find people who have been in this exact gap and made it through. Their testimony that the gap closes and that the work required to close it is finite is one of the most valuable things available when the gap feels permanent. Stay in the gap. The gap is where the work happens. Chapter 7, Permission to Want More. There is a quiet but powerful belief that many people carry, often without knowing it, that wanting more than you have is somehow morally suspect. This belief has many sources, cultural narratives about contentment and gratitude that conflate satisfaction with stagnation, religious traditions that were misread to mean that ambition is incompatible with humility, social environments where visibly wanting more than those around you was seen as a rejection of them, personal experiences of reaching for something and not getting it, where the reach itself was filed under foolishness rather than under worthy effort. Whatever its source, this belief acts as a governor on ambition. It makes wanting more feel like a character flaw rather than a natural expression of human potential. And when wanting more feels suspect, the ambition goes underground. It does not disappear, it rarely disappears, but it becomes something to be managed and contained rather than something to be channeled and acted on. You do not need permission from anyone to want more. Not from your family, your community, your past, or the version of yourself that learned to be modest. Wanting to build something meaningful, to serve more people, to earn more, to create more, to become more capable. These are not signs of ingratitude for what you have. They are signs that you are alive to your potential. The distinction that matters is between wanting more as a way of filling a hole, driven by comparison, by inadequacy, by the feeling that you are not enough until the goal is reached, and wanting more as an expression of vitality and purpose. The first is exhausting and ultimately unfulfilling even when the goals are reached. The second is sustainable and generative because the wanting and the building are themselves satisfying, regardless of where they lead. Want more, build more, reach further, not to escape who you are, but as an expression of who you are becoming. This is not selfishness. It is one of the most responsible things you can do with a life. Chapter 8, What Happens After You? You're thinking too small. At some point, if you do the work, the bigger thinking produces the bigger results. And then something unexpected happens. The ceiling moves again. This is the part of the story that the motivational version of Think Bigger rarely tells you. The version that says, expand your vision, do the work, achieve the goal, and then bask in the satisfaction of having arrived. The reality is different. The reality is that achieving a bigger goal does not produce a sense of arrival. It produces a new baseline. The vision that once felt enormous becomes the foundation for the next, larger vision. This can feel like a curse. Always reaching, never arrived. But it is actually one of the most valuable features of ambitious human nature. The process of building toward a bigger thing is itself deeply satisfying. It is not the destination that produces the most meaning, it is the building. What changes after you think bigger and achieve what the bigger thinking aim for is not the destination. It is you. The person who has built at that scale is different from the person who could only imagine building at that scale. The capacity is real now. The confidence is grounded in evidence, not hope. The sense of what is possible has been permanently revised upward based on demonstrated experience, not theory. And from that new vantage point, the next bigger thing looks different. It looks possible in a way it did not before, not because the obstacles are smaller, but because you are larger. This is the compounding of bigger thinking. Each expansion of vision and capacity becomes the foundation for the next. The person you become in the pursuit of something big is the greatest return on the investment. So think bigger, not once. Make it a practice, an ongoing commitment to examining your ceiling and asking, always, whether it needs to be higher. Conclusion: bigger is not about size. There is one thing to clarify before this book ends, because it is easy to misread the entire message as being about scale for its own sake. Thinking bigger is not about building the largest possible thing, or earning the most money, or reaching the most people. It is about refusing to allow invisible limits, inherited beliefs, social expectations, fear in the costume of realism, to determine what you attempt. For one person, thinking bigger means starting the business they have been postponing for a decade. For another, it means asking for the role that feels just out of reach. For another, it means writing the book, making the change, having the conversation, investing in the thing, moving to the place. Thinking bigger is always relative to where you currently are and what you are currently allowing yourself to consider. The invitation is not to want what someone else wants. The invitation is to want what you actually want, without the ceiling that has been artificially installed by forces that were never designed with your specific potential in mind. Remove the ceiling, hold the bigger vision, build the capacity, take the first step, stay in the gap, give yourself permission to want what you actually want, and watch what becomes possible. Key takeaways: your thinking has a size, the scale of possibility you will seriously entertain. That size was shaped by your environment, not your potential, and it can be deliberately expanded. The voice that calls itself realistic is often fear in disguise. Genuine realism points toward preparation. Fear dressed as realism points toward retreat. Learn to tell the difference. The people around you carry a model of who you are. When your vision expands beyond that model, their hesitation is often care, not sabotage, but it can still limit you. Be intentional about who you share your bigger thinking with early. Thinking bigger requires building bigger capacity. Identify the 2 or 3 most significant gaps between your current capability and your vision, and invest in them specifically. The first step toward big does not feel big. It feels small and uncertain. Take it anyway. It moves the vision from dream to project, and projects get built. The gap between the vision and the current reality is not evidence that the vision is wrong. It is a structural feature of every early stage endeavor. Stay in the gap. Wanting more is not a moral failing. It is an expression of vitality and purpose. Give yourself permission to want what you actually want. Achieving a bigger goal does not produce a rival. It produces a new baseline and a larger version of you from which to attempt the next one. A note at the end: somewhere in this book, there was probably a moment when a specific thought arrived, a goal that felt too big to say out loud, a version of your life that you have been keeping quietly in reserve, waiting for a better time, a safer moment, a more prepared version of yourself. That thought is the point of everything in these pages. Not the framework, not the chapter structure, the thought, the one that arrived when you were reading about ceilings and permission and the gap. Write it down. Tell someone who can hold it with you. Take one real step toward it today. The bigger thinking starts there, and what it builds, in your work, your life, and the person you become in the process, is worth every moment of the discomfort of thinking it for the first time.